Now let's have a little bit of a discussion on details that we're painting as a texture painter versus details that we're getting from modelers. I know this is a question that's been asked to me many times. What details do you paint versus what a modeler does, if it is a split up discipline. And the best approach I've found to be most successful is to leave all the what we call tertiary detail to myself, reserve all that detail to myself, and allow the modeler to provide all the primary and secondary details. And when I say primary, secondary, and tertiary details, I'm referring to forms in sculpture. When you talk about sculpture, you get the primary forms, secondary forms, and tertiary forms. So for me, tertiary forms are the pores, the fine wrinkles, anything that doesn't interrupt the structure of the head. And so we are currently in Mari 2.0, and I'm just going to quickly load in the ZBrush maps that will be provided to you guys by Ben Eoff, and we are going to take a look at those and further discuss the differences between details that he's providing from a modeling standpoint and details that I'm providing from a texture standpoint. So here are the basic setup here, and again, the supplemental material that I've provided in the Mari YouTube link. Feel free to refer back to those if you have any other questions, and if you have further questions, make a list and we'll talk about it during the webinar. But for right now, I'm not actually getting into any painting. I'm just kind of load the ZBrush maps, put them into a shader, and talk a little bit more about the forms. So in order to do that, I'm going to go to my Layers tab, which is inside this color channel. You have your layer, which is base layer. I can turn this on and off. And actually, before I do that, I'm actually going to create a new channel to reserve for my ZBrush. And there's this quick channel tab here, which is really nice. You can designate the resolution and the bit depth. And before in Mari 1.5 and 1.6, was kind of a backwards way to get flat black, white, gray, and transparent. You always had to create a new channel, fill it, or keep it transparent. It's kind of a hassle. Whereas here, I just click the one I want, and boom, it creates a new channel for me, which is really handy. I'm going to name this ZBrush Disp. I'm going to go into the Layers tab of that, and this layer exists inside the channel, and I'm going to either right click and go to Import, but this kind of gets cut off for the recording, so I'm just going to go from the top down menu, Import into Layer, and I'm going to grab the ZBrush maps. And here we go. So Ben did a phenomenal job with these maps and the sculpt, and this really brings to life the forms of the model. And we're going to be using these as reference guides when we're painting our tertiary details, so some of our wrinkles kind of go and flow with the structure that he's painted. And we're also going to use these in clever ways for our color maps to derive more color variation. But of course, I'll get more into that in week 3 and 4. For right now, I want to load this ZBrush Disp into a shader. And as you can see, the shader system is very different than what we're used to. It's literally just a repository where we can drop in our channels so we can see them all play nicely together. So currently, when you open up Mari, there are no shaders created by default. They're just kind of the default shader that comes in with the program, so you can see basic specularity and roughness. We're going to create a new one. I'm just going to create a blend. I'm not really going to talk about all these different shader types. I do talk about it in the supplemental materials, so if you're curious about more information on those, feel free to check that out, or go into the help and the reference guide. That will give you shine a little bit more information on the subject if you care about it. So right now I'm going to choose my color channel because that's 50% gray. And as you can see, I can adjust the specularity and the shininess. Sorry, like so. But what I really want to do, I actually want to tone this down a bit, is plug in my ZBrush Disp. So I'll just grab that. and it's going to come in really strong, so I'm just going to tone that back. Awesome. So let's talk a bit more about these forms. When I talk about primary forms, it's essentially the base model. So this model here would be considered primary forms of the face. When we introduce the ZBrush displacement, these are what we call secondary forms. So these forms help inform the structure of the face based off of the primary ones. And these two things I leave to the modeler because, quite frankly, it's a sculptural task and it's out of the realm of textures. So I like to, and quite frankly, again, it gives the modeler more freedom to do more work, which I'm always a fan of. Because as a texture painter, I would not call myself a modeler, I would not call myself a sculptor. So providing these secondary forms in textures would be very difficult, very time consuming, and quite frankly, you just don't get the results that you can get if you allow a modeler to do it. So these are the forms that I'm letting the modeler do. So for us, we're going to worry about the tertiary stuff. We're going to worry about the fine pores and the fine wrinkles that will help bring these forms here more into the photoreal realm. So I wanted to give you a quick overview of that and how I typically work with my modeler in achieving really nice results. Again, if you're a modeler and a texture painter, this still applies. I think it would be good to separate these things out rather than painting, for instance. Let's go back to the current channel. So instead of painting your primary and secondary forms, or shall I say your secondary forms with your tertiary forms, your details, it's going to be very difficult to separate that stuff out and have more control when you're actually painting your textures. So if you're a modeler and a painter and you're doing your own work, I would highly recommend separating these details out so you have more control in the end. Because what we're going to be doing is we're going to be taking Paul Callender's skin scans that he's provided over at Surface Mimic, and we're going to be projecting those all over this face in order to get all those fine details. And then referring back to this every once in a while to make sure that we're right on track. So I find this to be very useful and very handy to keep separate and to understand, typical workflows that you'll see at some of the bigger shops. So in the next section, we're going to look at Paul Callender's skin scans, go through a couple techniques I do to clean them up to make them more usable for my purposes, and then we're actually going to start painting in Mari and projecting them on the face.